Okay, I'm going to be showing a few different ways of getting the ribbon, modifying the ribbon, both in the raw XML and modifying how we can use the ribbon, how we can enable or disable buttons as we go along. So a short slide about myself. My name is Anders April, and originally I'm a civil engineer in applied physics, optics and microfluidic systems to be more exact. I started working with railway safety analysis after I was done, and by chance I got started on working with the Access project. My first Access project was in 2008, and since 2009 I've been a full-time Access developer. And 2014, I got nominated and received the Microsoft Most Valuable Professional Award. So about Access Europe. Seems I forgot to update that slide. So I'll just talk what is Access Europe. We are a newly started user group in which the idea is to host monthly meetings for Access users across Europe. If you're not from Europe, don't worry, you're welcome to be here. But the primary focus is Europe. It's the plan for each meeting to consist of a presentation of roughly, I'll try to aim for 30 to 45 minutes in length, followed by discussions and questions. And in the beginning, I'll probably be hosting and presenting at most of the meetings, but it is my hope that in time, people like yourself will be interested in presenting what you've done, showing your work off, showing your ideas, your content, and some know-how. So what is the ribbon? The ribbon is in, I think, all Office applications since 2007, and it replaces the toolbar that we're used to working with in 2003 or earlier. Ribbons are larger than the toolbars. They're visible all the time, usually on most computers, unless you actively hide it. Ribbons can be context sensitive. They can either appear or disappear based on what you've clicked on, what's the active object, and we can assign them as contextual ribbons to forms and reports. We can enable or disable buttons, even change the images depending on what is selected. I don't know for sure what Microsoft's reasons was behind introducing the ribbon, but I figure it's a result of increases to screen size and resolution so that there's more real estate on the screen, and Microsoft wanted to use this to make a visually improved toolbar. I also think as the feature set kept expanding in Office, there was a need for something that could better support the increased amount of decisions that was available and they needed to show, as well as the ability to use different size icons to better illustrate the button's function. And you can also have some really cool gallery type buttons. I'm not going to show that tonight, but if you've used Excel, you can show the different table styles, the way it shows them directly in the ribbon. I think that's pretty cool. And I think, especially us that have grown up with the old toolbars, it's been quite a big change. A lot of buttons were moved around and put into tabs with different names than what we're used to, so I had a lot of trouble finding stuff. But the pros of ribbons are that they're larger, their buttons are always visible, and they're context sensitive. You can even gray out buttons if they're not applicable for the current selection. And when it comes to access, we can assign ribbons directly to a form or report, so the ribbon only shows when the form or report is active. So why should we care about ribbons? I know there are a lot of guys out there who might have looked briefly at the ribbons and then tossed them aside for later study because they can be a bit hard to get started with. I know I was guilty of doing that myself, especially since I could just use my old code, generating toolbars, and that seemed to work just fine. But the ribbon is there to stay. It's been around since 2007. Microsoft are not going to replace it, as far as I know. And users have grown accustomed to the ribbon. They're expecting a ribbon-like interface. If you're showing them old toolbars, they will automatically think your application is old and dated. So we need to give the user what they expect. And once you know how to do it, it's actually not that difficult. But getting started can be quite hard. It's my firm belief that the best way to design a user interface is to give the user what they expect. This will make your user interface more intuitive, make it easier for users to get started with, and lowering the entry barrier to using your software is paramount to success and adaptation of your software by your users. And I find that a program should, and I know it can't always, but a program should be so easy to start that the user doesn't need a manual. If you can reach that point that he can just intuitively use your program, you will win over a lot of users. So I'm going to start with a blank ribbon. Most of my applications are released as compiled files. That means the user has no access to the original access ribbon toolbars for creating stuff. And it's possible to just build onto the existing ribbons. You could also add your own tabs to an existing ribbon. But for now, I'll show you how to start with an almost blank ribbon. So you can see this. It's the ribbon XML for a blank ribbon. There's a schema definition. This works for 2010 forward. I think it might not work if you're using 2007. I haven't tried it. So we have this ribbon start from scratch equal true. So this is basically telling Access that we want a blank ribbon. So I'm going to paste this into a table in an Access database. So in my Access database, I've created a table uses ribbons, consists of an ID, a ribbon name, and a ribbon XML field. And these has to be defined as a number, text, and a memo field. And if we look at it, we can see our ribbons. So this is the blank ribbon. It's going to be our first ribbon. To start loading this, I'm going to go into Files, Options, and Current Database. Scroll down a bit. You can see here ribbon name. It's going to select this blank ribbon. Close it. And I'm going to do a compact and repair on my database, and it should now load up. Which it didn't. Definitely showed the wrong ribbon. Okay. Just 1 second. I'll just copy and paste this into my ribbon once again. Opening my application. Okay. File options. Database. Set it to blank ribbon. Select OK. Now I'll open and restart my database. Now, what it's saying is that there is an error in the XML. This is actually something I put in there intentionally. And the reason I wanted to do this is I wanted to show a specific feature that can be quite important when you're doing your ribbons. If you're in Options of the client settings, scroll down, this show add-in user interface errors. I'm just going to remove it for a second. The default is that this is not toggled. And if you try to open an application with your ribbon and the ribbon XML is not good, what will happen is that the ribbon will simply not load. You won't even get an error message. So this ribbon is actually a default ribbon of a database when it's open as a compiled file. So if I want to get my errors shown so that I know what's wrong with my ribbon, I have to go into my ribbon again, or into my database. I'll have to go down into Options, Client Settings, and click on this Show Add-in User Interface Errors. You need this if you want to be able to debug your errors, or your if you want to be able to debug your ribbons. So I have a screenshot of that there. Now if I go and fix my typo, go right into the Users Ribbons table, and add a closing bracket to the XML, save it, and restart my database. Now it should load with a blank ribbon. Okay, so now that I fixed the typo, we can proceed. Now let's see what Microsoft's version of Start from Scratch really means. Notice how we're actually getting, if I click up here, this is the version of the blank database. It has a print button, which might not make sense for your application, at least not at this point. I don't want to print the form that I have here. It's not meant to be printed. And there's the privacy options, which puts you right back into this client settings, where you can see the current database, you can see what form to start with. We don't want this to be visible to our user. So let's close down that hole, and we can do that by looking at the backstage features. I'm going to go back in to my ribbon. I need to close this and restart it. So I'm back in my application. I'm going to open a small form that I've created for myself. This is actually just a form bound to the ribbons table, but I found that this form is easier for me to edit than it is to edit in the directly in the table. So now here I have what I call a backstage ribbon. This contains basically, you see we still have the ribbon Start from Scratch equal true. And what I've added is this part about the backstage. Backstage is basically what Microsoft calls this file button. In earlier versions of in Access 2007, it was shaped like a ball with a Windows icon in it. Basically what I have is all tab IDs, and I've set the visibility to false. I have the button ID, save as, visible equal false. All of these, the print, that was the one you saw before, I've set that to false. And the applications options dialog, I've set that to false. That's the one you were showing before. I'll click this apply ribbon. This basically just goes in, this button I've made just goes into file, options, current database, and switches the ribbon to whatever ribbon I have active in my form. So if I reopen my database now, let's see what it looks like. If I go up and click File, all I have is a Quit button. This is how I like it. Minimum, I don't want anything up in the file. I can't remove the file completely, not if I want a ribbon to show, but I can hide as much as I want. So this is actually an example of using a button. If it has ID Microsoft Office equal file exit. So what I did, I took that Quit button that came with the default backstage, and I just changed the label. I could write anything here. I could just write quit like this, or quit ComTool, which is the name of my application. And of course, this needs to be visible. I could hide it as well, but I think it makes sense to show at least something in our ribbon. since we can't hide that. So I'm going to make a hello world example. Those seems to be popular. So this is my hello world ribbon. I'm going to apply that. And I'm just going to show how it looks. And then I'll go through the XML of this button. So this is my first ribbon, hello world, and it just has a hello world. So if I go back and look at the XML more closely, I'm going to go into my presentation to say that the ribbon can actually consist of one or more ribbons that can be loaded. And a single ribbon contains one or more tabs, and a tab contains one or more groups, and a group contains one or more buttons. So this is the XML of the Hello World button. Now the first part we have is actually a comment. We can write comments in our XML, and I strongly recommend doing that. Otherwise, it can be quite difficult to read it back later. I also strongly recommend using indents so that you can see what goes together when the button starts and when it ends. Now, you can see we start with the button ID. Each button must have an ID. It must be globally unique, not just unique to your own ribbon. You can reuse Microsoft Office buttons, and you can even reuse them but change certain parts of it. Change the action of a button, but have everything else be the same as it used to be. The label, you saw how I changed the label of the quit button. So you just write label, and then you can write the hello world. There's a screen tip, and there's a super tip. The screen tip is the one-line tip about the button, and the super tip can be multiple lines. Let's go have a look at how that looks. If I hover my mouse over, you can see this is my screen tip. That's the part. It's a single line, and it's written in bold. The super tip can actually be quite many lines. I haven't tested how far you can stretch it. The last part is there's something below the line. This says ComTool. We'll use the application name, and we'll say press F1 for add-in help. And you can't hide that. And I find that pretty annoying, but I haven't found any way to hide it. So I will just have to live with it. One second. See, I need to get back to my presentation. So a few more properties here. There's the key tip. That's the button to use when navigating the ribbon by the keyboard. I believe if you press Alt while in your application, it will show the key tip on top of the button. This is similar to how you could use shortcut for your toolbars in previous versions. The size can either be a small or large. The button I've shown you is large. It basically means it's one button that will take up the whole space of the ribbon from top to bottom. But if you use a small size, you can have up to 3 buttons in the same column. You can use images. Either use your own custom image, or you can use one of the Microsoft Office built-in images. And finally, there's the on action. It's a function to call when the button is pressed. You see, in this case, I just wrote the message box directly in the on action. Could also have a function name here, but as you see, I just wrote message box hello world, comma 16. Now the 16, that's the constant that will show this critical X. I can't use the VBA constants. I can't write VB critical there, but I did just check in my Access application that VB critical is equal to 16. I could just write this value 16. There are some limitations to what you can put in the on action. but you can just try, mess around, see what works for you. Let's go ahead and have a button that can open a form. We can write it as simple as this. Give it a button ID. We give it a label. You can then give it a tag, which should be the name of the form, and we can give it a onAction event that we can make a generic function that can open any form based on the button. So we don't have to write code. If we have a lot of buttons that just open forms, we don't need to write specific code for each form, each button. We can just write the code once, put the name of the form in the tag, and read that tag from our ribbon open form function. I'm going to reopen my application, just get back in. It's a bit slow today. So this is basically the button of the code that we use, the ribbon open form. Note how it receives as a part of its parameters. It actually receives the ribbon control that is clicked. So I have dim string form name a string, and I just read the name of the form from the ribbon controls tag. Now, if it's empty, I exit the sub, don't do anything. But if it's not empty, I proceed to open the form, do command open form, string form name. Let's see, I think I wrote an example here. Yeah, form open. I'm going to apply this ribbon, reboot my application. You see it has a label documents, it has the tag, which is the form name. So this one, documents, I click it, goes ahead and opens one of my forms. It's really rather simple to make. If you just want a button to open a form, it's actually quite simple, and you can reuse this code for any button you want to create. The only things you need to make sure you do is to have the button name be unique and have the tag property written with the name of the form. So let's proceed to reusing built-in ribbon buttons. So I want to create a print ribbon, which just happens to also be a contextual tab, so I can show that at the same time. So if I want to create a customized print ribbon so that I can use that on my reports when they are in print preview. However, I don't want to start creating everything from scratch, as Access has a lot of buttons that we can just reuse. So I want to explore how we can reuse the built-in parts of the ribbon. So first I'm going to open the form or the report, see how it looks. Just going to take any report, open it. And since this is the demo database, I had already done what I was going to show you, so now I have to just delete what I was going to show you so I can show it to you again. So this is the default ribbon as it is shown when I have a report open. It has a print and has size, the page size, margins, the page layout, page setup, whether it's portrait, landscape, columns. Now, in most of my reports, I don't ever want the user to be able to change these settings. They might mess up a lot of stuff, a lot more than they'd fix, definitely. But I might want them to have the ability to zoom. That's a pretty neat feature. I don't want to have to code something like that myself. The ability to show 2 pages at once, 12 pages at once, if that's what the user wants to do, that could be pretty useful. I might also not want them to be able to do all of these exports to Word, HTML, email. I might want them to have the PDF option. That's pretty nifty as well. but that's all I want to have them be able to do. So if I go into my ribbon editor again, so I have this ribbon. I copy pasted it directly from the internet. It has a lot of stuff. Let's see what happens if I want to use that ribbon. Now, since it's a contextual ribbon, I have to assign it to the report. I don't want to assign it to my application. I just want to use it for the report itself. So open report and design view. I'll go look at the properties. And on the other tab, there is something called a ribbon name. Right here, I'll just write the name of my ribbon. You can also use the dropdown to show it. One thing you should be aware of is you've just added the ribbon. Let's say you just copy pasted it from the internet like I did. Then this ribbon name, if you use the dropdown, you won't be able to see the name of your ribbon until you've rebooted your database because the ribbons are loaded at startup. So just, if you don't see your ribbon name here, don't despair. Just try to reboot your application and see if it doesn't show up then. Let's see how it looks now. So this is just the one I copy pasted. Looks similar, but it has a sort and filter, still has the page layout, has this first print button, and now it actually has a couple of close buttons. So if I go back, close this report, I go back into looking at the XML, what I want to do is start hiding some of this stuff. I also first want to give it a different label. I'm going to call it print options in the label. So this group, print preview, print access, I'm going to set that visible equal false. The page layout, I didn't want that either, so I'll set that visible equal false. The zoom, I'm going to leave the zoom in. I'm also going to set this visible equal false. And I'm going to leave the print dialogues for the export. I only want the publish to PDF. Oh. I'm having a bit of trouble remembering what I wanted to show here. I'm just going to start my application again, see how far we got with what we've just changed. A useful thing is if you customize your ribbon or the quick access toolbar, and you put the compact and repair database up on the ribbon or in the quick access toolbar, it gets a lot easier to reboot your application. I just click this while holding down Shift, and my application basically gets rebooted. And if I'm ready to start playing with the ribbon, I'll click the button, but leave Shift. Well, I'll not press Shift while I'm doing it. So I want to go back and open my new report. Now I see we have a lot less options up here. I have my zoom still as I wanted. I've changed the label. I only have my PDF export. I still have a bit too many close buttons. I'll go back in and change that. Close the report. I'm just going to remove these buttons. Actually delete them completely from the ribbon. Reboot my application. And take another look at report. So now I have a ribbon for a report, and I can use this in all my reports. All I have to do is go and set the ribbon name property equal to my printing ribbon, and this will be what the users get to see. And you can do this even if your users are using runtime. You can show and enable these options for your user. by creating your own ribbon. So what I want to do now is I want to create a dynamic menu. First, I'm going to show what it is. I'm going to activate the ribbon I use for my application and reboot the application. So this is a dynamic button. You see this dynamic drop-down, recent reviews. It can actually change each time you load the application or even each time you use the drop-down. Recent items, or recent reviews in this case, is a good example of content that will change over time while we're using our application. So I click here, it'll actually show me the last 8 reviews I had open. And clicking any of these will take me to that particular review, open it on the form for me. To show another example, I take any old document, click the review, and open it. Now this is review 2049. See, there's nothing up here about that review, but if I open it, go ahead and close it again. In my recent reviews, it's now up here. I can go back to it. Let's see how we can implement that. First, we need a place to store the information. To create a dynamic dropdown, I want a table that can store this. I use a table, call it GBL recent reviews. It has a sort, which is just an auto number. And I simply use this so that as records are added to the table, I can just sort on the auto number to get the last 8 records for each user. I have the user ID and the review they opened. To get data into my table, I use this simple function. Whenever a review is opened, I want to add to the recent review list. Just pass in to this bit of code. I pass in the review ID as the review is opened. I open my table of recent reviews. I try to see if the review is already there. Then I remove it from this list, and then I add it back in. If the review is not there, I just ignore the middle part of the code and skip right to adding the review. This way, each time a review is opened, it gets placed on the top of my list of recent reviews. Since it's an auto number, it'll get a higher ID, and as I'm sorting on that ID, that makes sure I get the latest items. So to make the dynamic dropdown, this is the XML. And what you might want to notice is that instead of button, what it says here is the dynamic menu. Sorry. It still has an ID, has to be unique, has a label that we can make as we want. And I have a size large, have an image on it. Then it has a note this get content. That's a new tag. We haven't seen that before. And there's the invalidate content on drop, which basically means as the user clicks the button, it has to invalidate the control, it has to invalidate the content, and meaning of invalidate makes it reload the content. So let's go look at the function to fill in the menu. I have this function called ribbon get list of recent reviews. I like to prefix my ribbon functions with ribbon. That's a way of warning myself that changes to this function will not be caught as compile errors. I mean, I can change the function name thinking that I don't need this function. Functions of the database still compiles. I might think that everything is peachy because the compiler won't catch that we are calling functions in our ribbon, but the ribbon will fail as we try to use it. The purpose of this function let's see. purpose of this function is to create XML and returns this XML back to the ribbon, and that is actually the XML of the button. It's ribbon XML it's creating. I have a simple SQL statement that says that I want the top 8 reviews for my user. I join my recent reviews table with the review table so I can get the title of my reviews. Now I have a bit of XML that starts the. I have a string that contains the starting XML of my button. If the record set is already at the end, there are no results. That could be users that have just started and there's nothing. What I actually do is I have a button say no recent reviews. I can demonstrate this even. I'm not going to do that, short on time. So let's see. If we're not at the end of our record set, what I'm going to do is I'll create the ribbon for each individual button in my dropdown. I just call a function generate button XML, pass in the ID of my button as well as the ID of the review. This ensures that the button's ID becomes unique. Pass in the label, use the title, and I have noticed that if the title contains a comma, the ribbon XML gets messed up. So to prevent this, I added a replace to remove any commas that might be present in the review's title. And the on action for each button should be to just open the review, and it has the review ID. I see Roxanne wrote if I could enlarge my screen. I'm not sure I can do that, but I could try to zoom in a bit. I don't know if that helped or if that just messed up the screen for everyone. Okay, so back into looking at this. So this function, as I said, it's called each time the ribbon is pressed. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to add down here debug.print string menu. I'm going to clear this immediate pane, go back into my application, click this, and this means that the XML was just called, or the function to create the XML was just called. If I go back in, I can see the ribbon XML that was created by my function. If I take this XML for just a single button, put it into Notepad, it'll be a bit difficult to read, but if we shape it up a bit, we can actually see we have a very simple button, has a button ID, button open review 2049, has label equal title of the review, has an on action button that's just called to open the review. This is a custom function I've written to open a review when the ID is passed in. It's all very simple. Just want to take a look at the generate button XML function. Again, it generates this by taking in these optional parameters and just codes it into a single button for ease of use. I could have written it all out in the function, but I found this was easier. Another thing I just want to show real quick. See if I'm going to add a breakpoint to this code. Go back into the application, click the button. But notice how the code didn't break. That's because as you're using ribbon functions to call, if you're using ribbon buttons to call a function, you won't get breakpoints. The breakpoints simply don't work. I found this quite frustrating when I was working with the ribbon. And the way I found to overcome this as I'm coding and I'm debugging is to add a lot of debug print statements to try to figure out where this went wrong. It might be that it's failing on creating the ribbon code. So I might add something like debug print building menu. Now, if it fails, at least I'll know where it failed. I can go back in, view my debug, see, oh, well, it did get to the point of building the menu. So it failed somewhere between that and the following lines. So the debug print statements can be useful to debug ribbons, especially. Okay, so the next topic is going to be how we can enable or disable a button while the application is in use. And we might want to do this based on context. What is the item being clicked on? And to do this, we need to supply the following things to our application. We need to change the ribbon XML so it has a get enabled. We need a handle to our ribbon, and we need this to control when the invalidation of the ribbon, when the reload or refresh of the ribbon occurs. We need a function to determine whether the button should be enabled or not. And we need calls to refresh the button. Let's take a look at some buttons I have in my application. And you can see how they get enabled or disabled based on what is chosen in my form. Okay, so as I click in this field, as I select a document, these three buttons are available. Open the document, view the document properties, open the review of that document. If I click anywhere else, these buttons get disabled. You could also make them invisible, but I find that gives a lot of clutter with buttons appearing and disappearing out of nowhere. I find that enabling or disabling them seems to give a better visual representation without as much jumpiness to it. So let's go see how all this is done. I'll look at the ribbon, go down to the document properties button. And if we compare this to our previous Hello World button, the main difference is the get enabled property. So you notice this is a new tag. I haven't shown this just before. And the get enabled must be supplied with the function call, in this case, ribbon get enabled open document, that can supply a Boolean back to indicate whether or not the button should be enabled. There's also one other thing we need to add to the ribbon XML, so I'll take that first. We need to get the ribbon handle as the application is loading, and then we need to store that handle. And we can do this by changing the XML on the top part of the ribbon. So from the very first bit, I have this on load equal ribbon underscore main load. This function will store the ribbon in a variable so that I can access the ribbon later. And the main issue with this is that this is stored in a global variable, and that variable will be reset if your application crashes, if you have code that crashes, or if you are making any changes that cause a recompilation of your project. So sometimes the reference will go missing and you'll have to reboot your application. And this can happen a lot, especially while you're developing. Let me show this function in my application. So it's quite simple. This is the function, ribbon main load, and the ribbon object is automatically passed in. And I just set ribbon main equal object ribbon. And ribbon main is a public variable that contains my ribbon. And I can use ribbon main whenever I need to access the ribbon from somewhere else. Just hit down here, ribbon main dot, and we can see the IntelliSense options that I'm given here. So I want to show the ribbon get enabled. This is the function down here, ribbon get enabled open document. Now the syntax of this has to be public function, has to have the name, and these part are not something you can change. It has to say as iRibbon control has to have a by reference Boolean enabled. I think you might be able to change the names of them, but they have to come in this order. So what I'm saying is if the active form on my screen is different from my document manage form, then they should not be enabled, and I just go ahead and exit the function. If the active control on my screen, if that name is list view files, and I can tell you this is the list view files. So if it's different from list view files, then it shouldn't be enabled. But now I've reached the point where I know that the list view, if it gets to this point of my code, the list view is actually the active control. But I need to make one final test. I need to make sure that there's actually a document selected. It could be that the list view is completely empty. There are no documents in that folder. The final thing is I use my list view and check it for nothing. If the selected item is nothing, then I also do not want the enabled to be true. So if my active form is my document management form, and I have a document selected, then finally I go ahead and enable my button, setting the enabled property to true. Let's see what's next. We need to invalidate the control as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my code behind my document management form. I'm going to do a search for the word invalidate. So you can see here, invalidate. I use this in a couple of places. When the form is activated, what I'll do is I'll check to see if the ribbon is nothing. And the main reason I do this is when I'm in development, I don't want to get error messages. It should only happen in development that the ribbon is nothing. If the application is running, the ribbon should always be something. But if I'm on development, I might have started my application with the shift key pressed down, and I don't want to get error messages for that. So as I activate my form, I'll go ahead and invalidate the entire ribbon. I do actually do the same when the form is deactivated. When the user selects something else, selects another form, the form is deactivated and the ribbon gets invalidated as well. It means it gets to reload. But we can be more specific than invalidating the entire ribbon, because it might take time for the ribbon to be invalidated. It has to reload images, has to check all these callback functions to see if something should change. So I have another function as the list view files is exited, or as an item is clicked in the list view. I'll do the same. Check that my ribbon is actually there, and if it is, I'll go ahead and invalidate a single control at a time. So I have the 3 buttons that I want to change enabled properties of, and I'll invalidate them. So this means as they are invalidated, the code get enabled gets to run and decide whether the button should be shown or not. So the next thing, I'll show is this is my ribbon editor. It's quite simple, really. Just has the ID of the ribbon, ribbon name, ribbon XML. I find this makes it a bit easier to work with. Made a small couple of changes to it over the time over here. I've parsed out the ribbon into a list view, and as I click in my list view, the ribbon will focus, or the control over here will focus on the button. This is just to make it easier if I have to make changes, and I'm like, okay, I know I have to make changes to the Go to Document button. I can just find it over here, which is a lot easier than trying to find it in this big XML thing. If anyone wants this, feel free to send me a mail. I'll be happy to share the ribbon form. I also had quite a bit of fun with trying to get the tab key to work, so I could do inserts. I know you can use Control Tab to insert a tab, but the default behavior in this case, if you press Tab, is to move to the next control, and I didn't want that to happen. So what I did was I wrote my own code. Let's go see the ribbon editor just for a second. So made my own code for the form key down, saying if the key code being pressed is the tab key and the active control is the ribbon, then cant out the key code and basically insert 3 blank spaces at the position of the tab key. It's not terribly important, but just I find it a powerful way of making small modifications to the default behavior of the application is that I can now use tab keys directly in my control and won't switch to the next active item. So let's see, next. Getting to the question and comments parts. Just before I do that, I'm just going to make a quick advertisement. This site, accessribbon.de/en, it's a German site, but they have an English subsite as well. And this is probably where I learned 95% of my own ribbon coding. They have some excellent examples. I highly recommend them. Subscribe. If you want to get notified via email, go by accessusergroups.org/Europe, and you can subscribe there. You'll get emails on when we have our next meeting. And our next meeting is going to be January 7th, where Juan Soto from IT Impact is going to be a guest presenter, and he's going to show us how to use SQL Server to create a dashboard and access. He's an excellent presenter. You'll definitely want to see this. Thank you for coming. If you want, you're welcome to mail me with questions at TheSmileyCoder@gmail.com. Also note that Access User Groups, we also have a couple of different branches, so to say. We have Access with SQL, we have Access Web Apps. If you go to accessusergroups.org, you can see our groups, and you can see when they have meetings. There's also a Spanish group. I don't do Spanish, so I won't be joining that. But if Spanish is a language you can speak, you're welcome to try and see what they talk about. So I'm going to go and turn off the presenter mode so that someone else can talk if you have any questions. So if anyone has questions or comments, please speak up now.
What was your email address again?
My email address, I'll see. There you go.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else have comments, questions, something they want me to go over in more detail?
I thought it was excellent.
Thank you. So if there are no questions, I'm going to be asking about what comes next. What kind of topics would you like to hear about? Do you have anything that you've created that is fantastic, good, interesting, something you think that others could benefit from, or something that you might just want to get some feedback on? Want to present that? Let me know. You don't have to do a full presentation. If you just want 10-minute slot, 15-minute slot, just say that. That'd be good. My own topic suggestions is that I can talk more about tree view. I can talk about list views. I can show various bits of codes I have. I have a quite excellent application on tracking changes. You can also download that from my website, www.TheSmileyCoder.com. It basically implements track changes like Word has it. You can use that for memo fields. You can use it to compare different versions if you're into version control, which is stuff I do a lot on. Talk about making your developer add-ins. I made some few. They're not great. They're not like stuff I want to sell, but they solve problems I have, and I love using them. Talk about reports, report view, anything else. Yeah, I get a comment that there's a lot of echo. The echo is basically because one of you has a speaker that's close to the microphone, and that's why I use presenter mode while doing presentations. And yeah, I'll try to make the recording available as soon as possible. I think I forgot to record the first few minutes. I did a presentation on TreeView. That was the first presentation, and that is available from accessusergroups.org/Europe. Just go to click the meetings, and you can download it. I also have 6 YouTube videos on how to use the TreeView. So I suggest start by looking at them. And if there's anything you want me to expand on beyond what the videos already say, I could make that a topic for me.
Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Anders. This is George in Italy. How have
Hey,
you
George.
learned to build a ribbon? Have you done it by trial and error, or?
Yeah, I use that site I mentioned, accessribbon.de, and a lot of trial and error. I think that goes for. I'm self-taught in Access. I don't have a professional Access degree or IT degree even. So I do a lot of trial and error, or Google find stuff.
So do you need to be proficient in XML in order to be able to build it, or?
Nope, not at all.
No.
You just need to have patience in the beginning. It can get a bit frustrating.
It would be nice, like, for example, to have a book with lots of examples to follow, so that you can learn how to build various parts of the XML code that I've seen you use.
Mm-hmm. I think a very good idea when you're creating ribbons is to take baby steps. Start with a simple button. Don't make too many changes at once, because it can be quite difficult to find out where the error is in your XML. So if you limit it by changing a label, changing visibility, testing it, making sure it works, then go and change something else. But if you change 10 things in one go, it might be difficult to track down which part of it caused the ribbon to not load. Most often what will happen is the ribbon will just not load. It'll just be presented with your default ribbon. So thank you all. If there's anything else, I'll proceed to close the meeting. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.